Nobody warned Danny Harlow that the cafeteria would go silent the moment he walked in. He stood in the doorway, holding a plastic tray with something that was supposed to be food, and every alien eye in the room turned toward him. Some species had 2 eyes. Some had 6. One creature in the far corner appeared to have none at all, but Danny could feel it staring anyway. He found an empty table near the back wall, sat down, and started eating. The silence lasted another 10 seconds before the noise slowly returned, but it was different now. Quieter, nervous, like the sound of a forest after a predator passes through. Danny had been at the Galactic Unity Academy on Station Ornda for exactly 3 days, and he had already learned the most important lesson the place had to offer. Nobody wanted him here. The Academy was enormous. It floated in orbit around a gas giant in the Peleuri system, and it housed over 4,000 students from more than 60 species. Young aliens came here to study together, to learn about each other, to build the kind of cross-species understanding that supposedly kept the galaxy peaceful. It was the most prestigious school in known space, and Danny was the first human to ever set foot inside it. Earth had only made contact with the wider galaxy 11 years ago. Humanity was still new, still strange, still classified as a class 7 Death World species, which is a polite way of saying that most aliens considered humans to be dangerously unhinged biological nightmares from a planet that was actively trying to kill everything on it. Danny had read the briefing before he came. He knew that his bones were denser than most species could survive. He knew that his immune system was considered a biological weapon by at least 3 galactic health organizations. He knew that his ability to sweat, something he had never once thought about back home, was viewed as deeply unsettling by species that regulated heat through other means. That he also knew that his admission to the Academy was not really about education. It was politics. Earth needed allies, and the Galactic Council had agreed to a trial exchange program. 1 human student, 1 semester. If it went well, more would follow. That if it went badly, humanity would remain what it already was in the eyes of the galaxy. A species to be watched, contained, feared, in pressure. His 3 roommates were a Druvori named Goss, a Pelani named Lure, and a Shikari named Pila. Goss was an insectoid the size of a refrigerator who communicated through clicking sounds and had not said a single word to Danny since he arrived. Lure was a liquid-bodied creature who spent most of the day in a containment suit and left the room whenever Danny entered. Pila was small, feathered, and bird-like, with wide golden eyes that watched Danny with what seemed like a mixture of terror and fascination. On the 3rd night, Pila finally spoke to him. "Is it true that your planet has water that falls from the sky?" she asked from across the room, her voice barely above a whisper. Danny looked up from the textbook he was reading. "Zen? Yeah, all the time where I grew up. And you just walked through it? Without protection. Sometimes I used an umbrella. Sometimes I just got wet." Pila stared at him like he had just described walking through fire. Then she asked another question, and another. And for the next hour, Danny sat on his bunk and told her about thunderstorms and oceans and wolves and forests and what snow felt like on bearskin. Pila listened with her feathers puffed up in amazement. And for the first time since he arrived, Danny did not feel like a monster. The next morning, everything changed. Danny was walking to his first lecture when the corridor lights turned red and a sharp alarm tone filled the air. Students froze. Announcements blared in Galactic Common. "Attention, all personnel. The Rithkari specimen in Xenobiology Preserve Wing 7 has entered postpartum status. A litter of 4 cubs has been confirmed. The entire Eastern Biology Corridor is now under full containment lockdown. No personnel are to approach within 200 meters of the nesting zone. This is not a drill." Around Danny, students exchanged looks of fear. A tall Druvori muttered something about transferring to a different station. A group of Pelani students moved quickly in the opposite direction. Danny stopped a passing student. "What is a Rithkari?" The student, a 4-armed creature with gray skin, looked at Danny like he had asked what fire was. "It is the most dangerous land predator in the known galaxy. 6 legs, armored body, bioluminescent spines, jaws that can crush ship plating. And right now, she just had babies which means she will kill anything that moves within 50 meters of her. Danny nodded slowly. He had grown up on his grandmother's wildlife reserve in Montana. He had bottle-fed orphan wolf pups. He had helped relocate a mother grizzly bear that had denayed too close to a hiking trail. He knew what a protective mother looked like. He also knew that the most dangerous moment in any animal's life was not when it was hunting. It was when it was afraid for its young. Danny looked down the corridor toward the SEAL biology wing. The red lights pulsed like a heartbeat. He did not know it yet, but in less than 24 hours, he would be standing in that corridor with 2 alien cubs in his arms and the deadliest creature on the station staring him in the face. And every assumption the galaxy had ever made about humans was about to fall apart. The tour group had 17 students in it, and not one of them had any idea they were about to walk into the worst day of their lives. That IT was supposed to be routine. A guided walk through the outer corridors of Xenobiology Preserve Wing 7, led by a senior Dravari instructor named Brell. The students were mostly first years, young and curious, from species that had never seen a live apex predator before. Herbivores, aquatic species, a few insectoids who communicated through color changes in their shells. Pila was among them. She had signed up for the tour weeks ago, long before the Rithkari had given birth. The route had been adjusted to stay far from the sealed nesting zone. There were supposed to be 3 layers of reinforced barriers between the tour group and the creature. Nobody expected the wall to collapse. That IT happened without warning. A deep groan of metal, a crack that echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, and then an entire section of the ceiling and wall gave way. Dust and debris exploded into the hallway. Students screamed. Burrell threw herself over 2 smaller students as chunks of plating crashed to the floor. When the dust began to settle, the damage was clear. The corridor was half blocked with wreckage. 3 students were pinned under fallen panels, injured but alive. Emergency lights flickered on, painting everything in harsh red. And through the dust, through the jagged hole that the collapse had torn in the wall, the sealed nesting chamber of the Rithkari was now wide open. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but silence and settling dust. Then the roar came. IT was not a sound that could be described with normal words. It was felt more than heard, a vibration that passed through bones and organs and made every living creature in that corridor understand on a primal level that they were in the presence of something that could end them. The walls shook. Loose debris rattled on the floor. The Rithkari mother came through the breach like a living earthquake. She was enormous, nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, with 6 powerful legs, ending in claws that gouged the metal floor with every step. Her body was covered in dark, layered armor plates that shifted as she moved. Along her spine, rows of bioluminescent spines glowed a deep, furious red, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Her eyes were black and ancient and filled with one single emotion: rage. She swept her massive head across the corridor and bellowed again. Students who had been frozen in shock now scrambled backward, climbing over wreckage, dragging injured classmates, crying out in languages from a dozen different worlds. Burrell tried to activate the emergency containment system, but the structural damage had knocked out the local network. The automated drones that were supposed to respond in situations like this sat dead in their charging stations, their power lines severed by the collapse. Security was on the way. The alert had gone out the moment the wall failed. But Station Ornda was vast, and Wing 7 was on the far side of the Eastern Ring. Response time was estimated at 8 to 12 minutes. In 8 minutes, everyone in that corridor could be dead. The Rithkari mother was not hunting. She was searching. Her head swung left and right, nostrils flaring, spines pulsing faster. She let out a different sound now, lower, more desperate. It was not a roar. It was a call. She was looking for her cubs in the chaos of the collapse. 2 of the 4 newborns had tumbled through the breach and into the corridor. They were small compared to their mother, each one roughly the size of a large dog, with soft armor plates that had not yet hardened and eyes that were still sealed shut. They were blind, helpless, and crying. Their tiny voices were high-pitched and constant, a distress signal that was driving their mother into a frenzy. But the cubs had rolled deep into the wreckage, past fallen beams and shattered panels, and the mother was too large to reach them without tearing the entire corridor apart, which she was now beginning to do. Students pressed against walls. Some tried to crawl toward the far exit. Pila was trapped behind a collapsed support beam, her small body wedged into a gap that was too narrow for her to escape. She could see the Rithkari mother less than 40 meters away, tearing through metal like it was paper, getting closer with every swipe of her massive claws. Pila closed her eyes and made peace with whatever came next. 3 floors up and 2 corridors over. Danny Harlow was sitting in a study room trying to understand a textbook on interspecies diplomatic theory when the building shook. The lights went red. The alarm blared. And through the thin walls, he heard something that made every hair on his body stand up to a roar. Deep, furious, desperate, and underneath it, barely audible, the high, thin crying of something very young and very afraid. Danny closed the textbook. He stood up. He walked to the door that a group of students were running past in the hallway. Moving fast, their faces twisted with panic. One of them shouted at Danny in Galactic Common. Rithkari breach. Wing 7. Run. Danny looked in the direction they were running from. He could hear the roar again, closer now, vibrating through the floor beneath his feet. He could hear the screaming of trapped students. He could hear those small, desperate cries. Every instinct he had was pulling him in 2 directions at once. The smart thing was to run. The human thing was something else entirely. Danny turned and started running toward the sound. Behind him, the fleeing students stopped and stared. One of them whispered something in a language Danny did not understand, but the translation software in his earpiece picked it up anyway. The human is running the wrong way. Danny came around the corner and stopped. The corridor looked like a war zone. Ceiling panels hung at broken angles. Dust floated thick in the red emergency light. Sparking wires dangled from torn conduits. The floor was covered in shattered metal, cracked tiles, and chunks of fallen wall. And at the center of it all, the Rithkari mother was destroying everything in her path. Danny had seen large predators before. He had stood 30 feet from a grizzly bear in the wild. He had watched a bull elephant charge a fence line. He had once helped his grandmother tranquilize a mountain lion that had wandered into a school parking lot. He understood big animals. He respected them. This was something else entirely. The Rithkari was nearly 4 meters at the shoulder. Her 6 legs moved with terrifying speed as she ripped through wreckage, flipping support beams like they were made of cardboard. Her armored plates shifted and clicked with every movement, and the bioluminescent spines along her back burned a deep, angry red. Her jaws opened wide enough to swallow a person whole, and the sound that came from her throat was not just loud. It was pressure. Danny felt it in his ribs. She was not attacking anyone. Not yet. But she was tearing through the corridor with blind desperation, and the trapped students were running out of space to hide. Danny saw Pila. She was wedged behind a fallen beam about 20 meters to his left, her feathers pressed flat against her body in pure terror. She was alive. She was not hurt, but she was directly in the path the Rithkari was carving through the debris. Then Danny heard the sound that changed everything. 2 small, high-pitched cries, coming from the wreckage about 30 meters ahead, buried under fallen panels and twisted metal. The cubs, they were somewhere in that mess, blind and helpless, and screaming for their mother. And their mother could hear them, but could not reach them without crushing everything and everyone in between. Danny understood the situation in about 2 seconds. The mother was not a threat because she was aggressive. She was a threat because she was afraid. She could hear her babies crying, and she could not get to them. And the fear was turning into rage, and the rage was going to get someone killed. That he also understood something else. Something that no alien in this corridor would ever understand the way he did. This was a mother looking for her children. And on Earth, Danny had spent his entire life around mothers looking for their children. He dropped low and moved. The wreckage was thick, but Danny was smaller than the Rithkari and more flexible than most of the alien species trapped in the corridor. He climbed over a fallen beam, squeezed through a gap between 2 collapsed wall panels, and crawled under a hanging section of ceiling that groaned above him. His hands were cut within the first 10 meters. He did not notice. The cubs were huddled together in a pocket of space, created by two panels that had fallen against each other like a tent. They were small and soft, their armor plates thin and pale, not yet hardened by age. Their eyes were sealed shut, their little mouths opened and closed as they cried, and their tiny legs kicked weakly at the air. Danny knelt beside them and went very still. He took a slow breath. Then he reached out with both hands, gently, and scooped the first cub against his chest. It was warm. It squirmed and let out a sharp little cry, and Danny felt its small claws grip the fabric of his shirt. He picked up the second cub with his other arm, cradling it the same way. Both cubs pressed into his body heat, and Danny did something he had done 1,000 times before with scared animals back home. He hummed that it was low and deep, a vibration more than a melody, coming from somewhere in his chest. It was the sound his grandmother had taught him when he was 5 years old, sitting in a barn with a litter of orphan fox kits that would not stop crying. She had placed his hand on his own chest and told him to feel the rumble. She told him that scared babies did not need words. They needed warmth and a steady heartbeat and a sound that said, "I am here. You are safe. Nothing will hurt you." The cubs stopped crying. Their little bodies relaxed against him, their claws loosening, their breathing slowing. One of them nuzzled into the crook of Danny's elbow and made a soft sound that was almost like a purr. Danny stood up carefully, holding both cubs against his chest, and turned toward the breach. The Rithkari mother was there. She had stopped tearing through the wreckage. She was standing perfectly still in the center of the corridor, her massive head lowered, her black eyes locked directly onto Danny. Her spines had shifted from red to a deep, pulsing amber. Her nostrils flared wide, pulling in air, pulling in scent. She could see her cubs. She could see the creature holding them. And every single predatory instinct in her ancient brain was deciding what to do about it. The corridor was completely silent. Somewhere behind him, Danny could hear the faint sound of Pila breathing. Somewhere far away, the distant thud of security boots running through hallways. But here, in this moment, there was nothing but Danny and the mother and the two tiny lives pressed against his chest. Danny did not run, but he looked the Rithkari in the eyes and kept humming. And 20 meters away, the deadliest creature on the station took one slow step forward. The distance between Danny and the Rithkari mother was 20 meters. It might as well have been 20 centimeters. She filled the corridor. Her 6 legs were spread wide, claws sunk into the metal floor like anchors. Her armored body blocked the emergency lights behind her, casting a shadow that swallowed Danny whole. Her head was low, level with his chest, and her black eyes did not blink. Danny could feel her breath. It came in slow, heavy waves, warm enough to fog the air between them, carrying a scent like hot stone and something older, something that smelled the way a thunderstorm feels right before it breaks. He did not move. The cubs were quiet against his chest. Their small bodies rose and fell with steady breathing, and one of them had curled its tail around Danny's forearm like a vine. They were calm. They were warm. They had stopped being afraid. Their mother had not. She took another step forward. The floor cracked under her weight. Her spines shifted color again, cycling from amber to something darker, something that pulsed like a warning. Her lips pulled back slightly, revealing rows of teeth that were each longer than Danny's hand. Behind Danny, somewhere in the wreckage, a Pelonese student made a small, involuntary sound of terror. The Rithkari's eyes flicked toward the noise for half a second, and her spines flared bright red. Danny hummed louder. Not much, just enough to pull her attention back to him. Back to the sound. Back to the 2 small heartbeats pressed against his own. She looked at him again. Danny had read once that the Rithkari were among the oldest predator species in the galaxy. They had existed for millions of years before any of the current spacefaring civilizations had learned to make fire. They were not animals in the way most aliens understood the word. They were ancient, intelligent in ways that did not translate into language. They understood territory, family, hierarchy, and threat on a level that went deeper than thought. And right now, this mother was reading Danny the way Danny read animals back on Earth. She was looking at his posture, his breathing, his eyes, the way he held her cubs, the sound he was making with his chest. She was processing all of it, running it through millions of years of evolved instinct, and she was deciding one simple thing. Was this creature a threat to her children, or was it something else? Danny lowered himself slowly to one knee. He moved like honey, like water, like something that had no sharp edges. He tilted his head down and to the side, exposing his neck. On Earth, among mammals, this was the oldest surrender signal in existence. I am not a challenge. I am not a rival. I am making myself vulnerable to you, because I trust you not to kill me. He did not know if it would translate across species. He did not know if a Rithkari would read it the same way a wolf or a bear would. But it was all he had. The mother went still, her spines dimmed. The red faded to amber, then to a pale gold, then to something almost white. Her lips slowly covered her teeth again. Her nostrils flared once, twice, pulling in deep breaths of the air around Danny. She smelled the cubs on him. She smelled his sweat, his skin, the oils from his hands where he had cradled her babies. She smelled earth, rain and soil and pine, and the ghost of 100 different animals that Danny had held in his life, all of them scared, all of them small, all of them carried the same way. She took one more step forward, then another. She was close enough now that Danny could see the individual plates of her armor shifting, could see the fine cracks and scars across her hide from years of life. She was old, this mother, old and strong and tired and afraid. Danny lifted his arms slightly, bringing the cubs forward, not offering them like objects, presenting them, showing her that they were whole, that they were unharmed, that his hands had not hurt them. The mother lowered her enormous head until it was level with Danny's face. Her breath washed over him, hot and heavy. One of her eyes, vast and black and deep as a well, was close enough for Danny to see his own reflection in it. She exhaled, a long, slow breath that carried the tension out of her body like a tide going out. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature her size, she opened her mouth and took the first cub from Danny's arm. Her teeth, each one capable of shearing through steel, closed around the tiny body with the softness of a whisper. She placed the cub on the ground between her front legs, where it immediately curled up against her warmth. She came back for the second one. Danny held still as her jaws came close to his chest, close enough that he could feel the edges of her teeth brush his shirt. She took the cub and placed it beside its sibling. Then she straightened up and looked at Danny one last time. He could not read alien facial expressions. He did not pretend to know what a Rithkari was thinking. But in that moment, in the way she held his gaze for those few silent seconds before she turned away, Danny felt something pass between them that did not need a language. The mother gathered herself, turned, and walked back through the breach toward her nesting chamber. At the threshold, she paused. She looked back over her armored shoulder at the human still kneeling in the dust. Then she was gone. Danny stayed on his knees for a long time. His hands were shaking. His shirt was torn. There was blood on his palms from the wreckage. Behind him, the corridor was completely silent. Then Pilo whispered from behind her beam, her voice thin and trembling. Danny, Danny, are you alive? He let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like a year. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I think so. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and it broke the galaxy. It came from a security camera mounted high on the corridor wall, one of the few that survived the collapse. The angle was not perfect. The dust made the image grainy, but it captured everything. The human crawling through wreckage. The human picking up 2 Rithkari cubs and holding them against his chest like they were his own. The human kneeling in front of a 4-meter apex predator and not running. And the predator choosing, against every known model of Rithkari behavior, to let him live. The footage reached Station Oranda's internal network within the hour. It hit the galactic communication relays by the end of the day. Within 3 days, it had been viewed over 9 billion times across more than 200 star systems. Danny did not know any of this because Danny was asleep. The medical team had found him still kneeling in the corridor when they finally arrived. His hands were cut from the wreckage. His heart rate was elevated. His shirt was shredded. But he was conscious, calm, and his only question was whether the students who had been trapped were okay. They were. All 17 had survived. 3 had minor injuries from the collapse. None had been touched by the Rithkari. The doctors cleaned his wounds, gave him something for the pain, and told him to rest. Danny walked back to his dormitory room, lay down on his bunk, and slept for 14 hours straight. When he woke up, the galaxy was different. His personal communication device had over 8,000 unread messages. His inbox was full. The Academy's administration had called an emergency session. 3 galactic news networks had requested interviews. A Druvari diplomat from the neighboring system had sent a formal letter asking for the human's name. Danny ignored all of it and went to find breakfast. The cafeteria was different this time. When he walked in, it did not go silent. It went the opposite direction. Every table turned toward him, and the sound that rose was not the nervous whisper of 3 days ago. It was something warmer, something that sounded like the beginning of respect. That he sat down alone, because that was what he was used to, but he was not alone for long. Pila found him within minutes. She crossed the cafeteria at a near run, her feathers ruffled and her golden eyes bright with something that Danny slowly realized was a mixture of relief and awe, and something he had never seen directed at him before on this station. Gratitude. She sat across from him and said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached across the table with one small, feathered hand and touched his bandaged palm. "My people have a word," she said softly, "for someone who walks toward danger when every instinct says to run. Someone who puts their body between harm and the helpless. We have a word for this, and it does not exist in Galactic Common. There is no translation." Danny looked at her. "What is the word?" Pila said it. It was a sound made of breath and music, and something that hummed in the chest the way Danny's humming had hummed in his. He could not repeat it, but he felt it. "On Earth," Danny said quietly, "we just call that being a decent person." Pila's feathers fluffed up again, and Danny thought she might be smiling. Over the following days, the Academy transformed around him. The Xenobiology department held 3 emergency conferences. Their models predicted with absolute certainty that no non-Rithkari creature could approach a postpartum mother and survive. The data said Danny should be dead. The footage said otherwise. Professor Doohan, the head of Xenobiology, published a preliminary analysis. Her conclusion was careful but groundbreaking. She believed the Rithkari mother had recognized Danny not as prey, not as a competing predator, but as a protector. His body language, his calm, the way he carried the cubs, the deep vibration from his chest, these were signals that only a predator species could produce. But not just any predator. A predator that had evolved alongside other species, that had learned to coexist with dangerous creatures rather than simply destroying them, that a predator with empathy. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Most apex predator species in known space were solitary, territorial, and violent. They did not form bonds outside their own kind. They did not carry the young of other species. They certainly did not kneel before a raging mother and hum. But humans came from Earth, a world where the dominant species had spent thousands of years living alongside wolves, horses, elephants, and 100 other creatures that could kill them. A world where the apex predator did not just hunt. It also healed, protected, and loved. The Academy's administration called Danny to a meeting. The room was full of senior faculty, 2 Galactic Council observers, and the station commander. They asked him what he had been thinking when he ran toward the Rithkari. Danny sat in his chair, his bandaged hands folded in his lap, and thought about it for a moment. "I heard babies crying," he said, "and I heard a mother who could not reach them. I was not thinking about diplomacy. I was not thinking about the exchange program. I just heard something scared and something desperate, and I went." The room was quiet for a long time. Later that evening, Danny walked to the Xenobiology wing. The nesting chamber had been resealed with a temporary barrier. A warning sign in 12 languages was posted on the door. Danny sat on the floor outside the barrier and waited. After a few minutes, he heard movement inside. Heavy footsteps, the sound of armor plates shifting, then a deep, slow breath from the other side of the wall, and silence. Danny leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The mother knew he was there, and she was not afraid. 6 weeks after the corridor incident, the Unity Assembly gathered in the Great Hall of Station Orinda, and for the first time in the Academy's history, every single seat was taken. The Great Hall was built to hold thousands. Curved rows of seating rows and tiers around a central stage, designed so that species of every size could see and hear. Druvari towered in the back rows. Pelani floated in their containment suits in the middle sections. Shikari perched in the upper galleries, their feathers catching the light. Dozens of other species filled every remaining gap, and the balcony screen showed feed from across the station for those who could not fit inside. They were all here for the same reason. The human had been invited to speak. Danny stood backstage and wished very badly that he was somewhere else. He was not a public speaker. He was not a diplomat. He was a 24-year-old from Montana who had spent most of his life in muddy boots helping his grandmother tag elk and mend fences. The idea of standing in front of thousands of aliens and saying something meaningful made his stomach feel like it was full of wasps. Pila was standing beside him. She had appointed herself his unofficial guide, translator, and friend over the past weeks, and she showed no signs of stopping. She looked up at him with her wide golden eyes and tilted her head. "You are afraid," she said. Terrified, Danny admitted. "You faced a Rithkari mother and did not flinch. That was different. The Rithkari was not going to judge my grammar." Pila made a soft chirping sound that Danny had learned was laughter. She touched his arm. "Just tell them what you told me. Tell them about your grandmother." Danny took a breath, walked out onto the stage, and looked at the sea of alien faces staring back at him, but he did not give a grand speech. He had tried to write one, and it had come out sounding like a textbook, so he had thrown it away. Instead, he just talked that he told them about Earth. Not the version they had read about in their threat classification files, not the death world of crushing gravity and toxic atmosphere and endless predators. He told them about the real Earth, the one where his grandmother had a ranch at the foot of a mountain range, where the sky turned pink every evening, and where the wolves howled at night, not because they were hunting, but because they were talking to each other. He told them about the time his grandmother found an orphan bear cub on the side of a road, how she brought it home and fed it with a bottle, and how Danny, who was 7 at the time, slept on the floor next to the cub's crate for 2 weeks because the cub cried when it was alone. He told them how they released the bear back into the wild a year later, and how his grandmother stood at the edge of the tree line and watched it go and cried, not because she was sad, but because she was proud. He told them that humans were not gentle by nature. Earth had made them tough and stubborn and sometimes violent. Their history was full of wars and mistakes and cruelty. He did not hide that, but he said that Earth had also given them something else. It had given them millions of years of living alongside creatures that could kill them. And instead of just killing those creatures back, humans had learned something strange and difficult and beautiful. They had learned to love the things that frightened them. "I did not run toward the Rithkari because I was brave," Danny said. His voice was quiet, and the Great Hall was so silent that every word carried to the highest row. "I ran because I heard a mother who could not find her babies. And where I come from, that is not something you walk away from. I do not care if the mother is a bear or a wolf or the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. A parent looking for their child sounds the same in every language." He paused. He looked down at his hands, still marked with fading scars from the wreckage. "My grandmother used to say something. She said the measure of a species is not what it can destroy. It is what it chooses to protect." Danny looked back up at the thousands of faces watching him. "That is all I came here to say." He walked off the stage, and the hall was silent for 5 full seconds before it erupted. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily, the way a river changes the shape of stone. Danny's roommates started talking to him. Goss, the silent Druvari, brought Danny a small carved figure from his homeworld and placed it on Danny's desk without a word. Lure, the Pelani who had avoided him for weeks, asked Danny to help him study for an exam that a Druvari senior named Finn, who Danny had overheard calling humans animals early in the semester, approached him in the corridor one afternoon. Finn was tall and rigid, and his mandibles clicked nervously as he spoke. He said he was sorry. He said he had been wrong. Danny shook his hand and told him not to worry about it. The Galactic Council received a formal petition from the full faculty of the Academy. It requested a review of Humanities Class 7 Threat Classification. Attached to the petition was a single file. For minutes and 11 seconds of footage, Danny never watched the recording. He did not need to. He already knew what it showed. Just a person doing what his grandmother had taught him on his last evening before the semester break. Danny sat alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars through the wide viewport.